We've got Peter Ladner right here speaking second. We've got Ece Boz right over there who'll be speaking third, and I'll be speaking fourth. So thanks very much for coming again, and I want to launch right in with Jaimie. Jaimie, if you could just introduce yourself and say a few words.
Hi everyone, I'm Jaimie Borisoff. I'm a research director at BCIT. I do assistive technology, research and development. I've been working in that field for about 20 years now. In 1990, I moved to Kitsilano to attend the University of British Columbia, and I've been living there ever since. I moved there just after I suffered a spinal cord injury after a car accident, which left me having to use a wheelchair for my primary means of mobility. A couple of years later, I got this thing I'm sitting on right now. It's called a hand cycle. It's been heavily modified since then. Now it has electric motors, and it's just a great way to get around the city. And if I think back to my time living in Kits, living in Vancouver, and my relationship with Stanley Park, I actually only visited Stanley Park maybe once or twice a year until about 2020. And I thought back about why was that? Why wasn't I enjoying this amazing park we have in the middle of our city? And there's a couple of reasons. Anytime I did visit it, on my bike for instance, it was a bit difficult to get to. And that changed in 2020 when the city made Beach Avenue fully accessible to bikes with the protected bike lane. That made me, especially being someone who's lower, who's a little bit harder to see by cars, feeling a lot safer to get around the city on a bike. And the second reason I didn't visit Stanley Park quite as often as I would have liked is the seawall is not accessible to vehicles like this. So you might hear in the media that the Stanley Park is fully accessible with 2 car lanes as it was before COVID. That's not the case at all. There's these barriers on the seawall that I can't navigate in this device. They're still there. They've been there since I can remember. It's also very narrow. There's also lots of interaction with kids and people, and it's very difficult. You can see how wide I am, how low I am to interact with in this sort of situation. So in 2020, when the Parks Board made the protected bike lane through the Park Drive, that just opened up a whole world of possibilities for someone like myself, where I can now access the park. I could go to the seawall when I wanted to in areas that were accessible, and I do that still. I go down to Third Beach, for instance. But then when I want to get around the park, I can be on the protected bike lane, be safe, and move as easily as I want to. So I just want to get that message out there that for wheelchair accessibility, for people with disabilities, we need all options. We need the ability to get here by car and have great parking, which we have, but we also need the ability to get here safely on hand cycles and other forms of mobility. Thanks.
I'm here as a person who enjoys cycling in the park. I'm a grandfather. I'm also the chair of the BC Cycling Coalition, and I'm on the board of the David Suzuki Foundation. And I'd just like to begin by saying that every major city in the world that anybody admires is spending a lot of money on increasing cycling infrastructure. Cities like London, New York, Paris, Los Angeles, Edmonton, Barcelona, you name it, hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent. And I think it would be just so disappointing and such a missed opportunity if Vancouver didn't take advantage of this huge amenity we have in the park here to expand cycling and make a protected lane for cyclists around the whole park. And I think if the city wants to have its swagger back, as the mayor told us recently, then a protected bike lane all around Stanley Park would be an amenity that would be the pride of this city. And I'd like to just promote the idea as something that would be more than we've ever had before and would enable a lot of possibilities of more people to get into the park with more access and more different ways of getting around. And furthermore, I've also been in business. I own my own business, and I understand the problems of the businesses in the park. My son, somewhere around here, was in the restaurant business and had to shut 3 restaurants because of COVID. I've personally felt the pain in my family, problems with COVID in restaurants. And I sympathize with the problems that people had when the park was entirely closed to cars. But now that it's open, there's a way for cars to get around, there's a way for tour buses to get in, and if we had a continuously protected cycle route for cyclists to come around, I think there's a huge opportunity for those businesses. And we could turn this into a main attraction in Vancouver. Come to Stanley Park, ride around the park, get up the hill, be happy at the top, have an ice cream and a coffee, continue on down. There's a brew pub further down. And for those who say, well, that's fine, you know, if you're an elite cyclist and all that, that's not true at all. There are lots of people. I'm a senior myself. I ride around an e-bike now. My wife rides around an e-bike, and my grandson who's over there, he learned how to ride his bike in this park when it was closed to traffic, when he was 6 years old. And at the age of 6, he was able to ride his bike up that supposed hill that's only for elite people. So I think it's important to remember that this project that's being proposed, if it were adopted to make the entire route safe, would enable people like him and seniors, people of all manners of disability, ability, recreational cyclists, tourists who come and rent a bike, to really enjoy this park in a way they can't do if it's a broken up lane with part protected and part not. Thank you. If you do not have a fully protected lane, people will be fearful and not come. And to have a gap doesn't work. Right now it seems as if we are reorienting transportation in this park to cater to a private business that's running a horse and buggy for $50 an hour that's wheelchair inaccessible. And to me, that's not a high priority.
Very nice to meet all of you. I am mostly using the park for recreational purposes. Over the weekend, we come here with me, my husband and son, and we do our bike rides, or we go to park and have nice walks. I also commute from Kitsilano to West Vancouver. That's where my workplace is, and I am actively using the park. Before the COVID, I was using it pretty much 5 days a week, there and back. This is what I've noticed with the park. Over the years, with the introduction of e-bikers, e-scooters, and of course the tourist attraction, it's a huge tourist attraction, we are getting more and more traffic. And I find it extremely uncomfortable to cycle, especially with my child. Now we have a bike trailer. It is taking a lot of space when we have to cycle on the seawall. And we are demanding for a secure, separated bike lane because we need to have a proper way of traveling in the park itself, not just the city itself. Yeah, unfortunately, over the weekends, on a sunny day, it is overloaded. We can't travel safely. The other thing I want to mention that as a young family, if the separated bike lane is not protected, we will be forced to use the seawall. This is not a good option. We need to be provided with alternatives. And unfortunately, young families who find this as dangerous, we will be forced out of the park. We won't be able to come here and enjoy our weekend or weekday rides. And as I mentioned earlier, with the introduction of e-scooters and e-bikes, and by the way, I think everything is great because you don't have to deal with the hills anymore. It makes it very comfortable to have these kind of difficult rides. And at the same time, people can have active time outside, outdoors. So we have to keep the bike lane, we have to keep the separated bike lane because unfortunately seawall is not able to meet with the demand. So I believe the park board should continue providing the safe option to everyone and relax the busy seawall for everyone, not just for the cyclists, but also pedestrians. And I think we should keep our Stanley Park beautiful and safe for all of us. Because I believe the city and the park board should always want the best solution for most people. Thank you so much.
I'm just so happy that people came out to provide a different perspective. My name is Ece Slakov, and I'm the Hub Cycling Vancouver Park Board Liaison. We had a couple of messages from people who couldn't be here but wanted to also be here and say something. So Bishop John Stevens, who is the Anglican Diocese of New Westminster, which encompasses Metro Van, Fraser Valley, Sunshine Coast, and up to Whistler, says, long before settlers arrived in this region, it's been a significant place connecting land, sea, mountain, and river. Stanley Park has been maintained as a symbol of all for the city of Vancouver and the surrounding area. We need to ensure that we care for this area with deep concern and also enable access for all people. It needs to be symbolic of how we care for this planet and appreciate the beauty of the region. We do not need more cars in this fragile area of Stanley Park, and we do need to expand access for bicyclists, hikers, runners, wheelchairs, and strollers. Room for all to connect more fully with nature and less impact on the beauty that we appreciate. So that was Bishop John Stevens. Saw David Suzuki yesterday and he said, I can't be there, but please let everybody know that he wants to see more options for accessibility in the park, including the bike lane. So on speaking for Hub Cycling, this, in my opinion, is about a Stanley Park that is truly for all and not just for those primarily in motor vehicles. It's important to remember that this is a hugely popular lane, not just with people biking, but Business in Vancouver reported in a May survey of last year, 2022, that 63% of Vancouverites think that it's a good idea. The bike lane is important for equity and accessibility. Hub Cycling speaks for many seniors, people who have mobility issues, families, persons of low income. And you can see that in some of the diversity of speakers that we have here today. People who can't drive a car, people who don't want to or can't afford a car, they need alternatives. We need to combine all the different alternatives, including cycling, walking, people who have to access by car. I'd love to see public transportation options throughout the park. Right now, you can only get into the very entrance of the park with public transportation. Terribly important to remember our climate emergency. Stanley Park remains part of the Vancouver Climate Emergency Action Plan. We have got to reduce emissions from motor vehicles. It's second only to emissions from buildings in the city of Vancouver for the emissions that we are facing. It's 37% of our Vancouver emissions come from motor vehicles. We can see the evidence of climate damage throughout the year here in Vancouver now. In the winter, it's often taking the forms of terrible storms that are damaging our iconic seawall. And as Ece was saying, we can no longer count on the seawall both for being too overflowing with people as well as being for closed down for chunks of the year due to climate damage. The motion in 2020 that asked for a study to look into reducing motor vehicle traffic in the park and to look at alternatives. That led to the Stanley Park Mobility Study. One of the things there to look for is green transportation alternatives to support equitable access for all users. We're still waiting for that mobility study to come out as we're looking at what we're going to do with the bike lane, which seems a little bit backwards to me. But we need to retain our bike lane. We love this bike lane. Just a quick note to say that parks all over the world are also starting to get rid of a lot of motor vehicle traffic, making them more peaceful and more conducive for everybody to enjoy. That's parks like Golden Gate in San Francisco. Central Park and Prospect in New York, and recently closer to home, Banff National is now looking at ways to get people into the park other than private motor vehicles. So why is Stanley Park heading in the opposite direction? There's a meeting tomorrow evening to vote on 3 options that have been put forward. They range from essentially no bike lane to improving the current bike lane that we have, which is option B, and Hub Cycling stands firmly behind option B for the vote tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.